I'd like to welcome you all to today's YouthActionNet webinar on building relationships with businesses. This webinar is part of a learning series for YouthActionNet fellows, alumni, and their ventures. So we're very glad to have you join us today and hope that you will join us for future webinars as well. Before I introduce today's presenter and we get started with the session, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we are recording this webinar and putting it online later, so you'll be able to go back and review the content, plus you can share it with your colleagues. After the webinar, we will be sending you all follow-up email to share the link to the recording as well as links to other useful resources. During this presentation, your microphone will be muted, but as the presentation is going on, please feel free to ask questions through the chat box you'll find on the right-hand side of the screen. I'll be leading a Q&A session after the presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Jim Peirce. Jim is the Vice President of Strategic Planning and Outreach at the International Youth Foundation, where he works in conjunction with IYF's board and senior management on strategy development, as well as overseeing marketing and communications. In addition to degrees earned from Carnegie Mellon University and Pennsylvania State University, Jim has 13 years' experience in corporate marketing and international sales and has been at IYF since 2003. Today he is going to discuss IYF's approach to building relationships with businesses and how this approach could be useful for your ventures. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Jesse. Glad to be here and happy to be participating. And as my picture shows, my thoughtfulness and my diligence in how we approach CSR at IYF. It really is a pleasure to be participating, and hopefully I can shed some light at least on one way of thinking about what you see here now is this big world of CSR and business and companies. And why I put this slide up, quite frankly, is because sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. There's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of talk, there are a lot of conferences, there are a lot of webinars actually on this topic, and sometimes it can get a little confusing on which end is up. And so I'm here to hopefully help clarify some things and at least give you some concrete examples of how IYF is thinking about it, if nothing else, and hopefully you can find that useful for your organizations. A little bit about me beyond what Jesse said in my story, actually, and how did I get to this particular position. So the 14 years in private sector was really rising through the ranks of a sales and marketing function. Quite frankly, I like to describe it, in all essence, I was a refrigerator and home appliance salesman. I wasn't knocking on doors per se, but working with wholesalers and bigger companies, the likes of Best Buy, Carrefour, Walmart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things is that one of the reasons IYF actually brought me on board was to bring that kind of business perspective and business thinking and applying it into a mission-driven organization. And so that's what I do here, and a little bit about IYF. So the overview of IYF, I'm not going to read all of this, that I want to focus on is the last bullet here, actually the first and the last. We were founded in 1990. That's nearly, almost in a couple years, it's going to be 25 years ago. So some of the stuff that I'm going to be presenting today, quite honestly, you could think of it, it took us 25 years to get here. So there's a little bit of a legacy here. So as you think through your own organizations and your own situations, be mindful of the fact of where you are in your own evolution. And everything's going to need to be tailored, and we're going to need to temper it to suit, you're going to have to temper some of these concepts and ideas that I present to where you are in your evolution. The last bullet is just to give you a sense of what we've been able to achieve in the 23 years. So $185 million have gone through the IYF system in the form of 1,000 grants to youth-serving organizations in 134 countries. That's a lot of business going through the filter. This is gives you a glimpse of some of the organizations that we've actually worked with. So this isn't everyone, but it gives you a good sense of the types of companies that we're talking about, the major multinationals, from the Golden Arches and the French fry burger joints, of McDonald's, to the chewing gum folks at Wrigley, to the cell phone people at Samsung and Nokia, to the coffee joints at Starbucks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and Hilton Worldwide and so forth. And then we've got in the mix here, you'll see USAID, the World Bank, and a couple of these bilateral, multilateral organizations, and not to leave out the folks at the IDB and the MIF. This grouping becomes really important because this is about public-private partnerships here. And what role does a nonprofit like IYF or a role like yourselves, your own NGOs, play in the mix of these kinds of players? So we'll talk a little bit about that too. Just to give you a sense for where we are today, this is a 2012 snapshot. These are based on our audited financials. Last year, IYF raised or went revenues, if we didn't raise, revenues that we spent were $43.7 million. 41% of that was actually represented by the corporate sector, the balance. So this gives you a good sense for what we're talking here in absolute numbers. So what do we do with this? What does this all mean? So that's just a little bit of background. And one thing I want to say to Jesse and folks, if I'm going too fast, which I have a tendency to do, please tell me. I will slow down. If you have questions, please send them to Jesse, and I will stop and I will answer them as we get into the meat of this presentation. So with that said, so we had the earlier slide which showed CSR and all the kind of the word cloud related to it and the buzz language around that. Another way of looking at it, more recently actually, is this concept of creating shared value. Nestle as a company likes to push this out quite a bit actually, and so does Harvard and some other organizations. So what I did is I just took a quick, I went to Google and did creating shared value, and this is what came up. You see a lot of stuff here. One of the things that this Google search, the image that it portrays back to me, I love to do the image selection of Google when I'm talking or trying to explore and research a concept. Look at these charts. Look at the diagrams. Some of them are very complicated here. Lots of arrows and boxes and puzzles and this and that and so on and so forth. Looks a little complex on the outside, right? That's what we all think about it. And if you listen to some of the panel conversations, whoa, this is way over my head. Well, it's actually not. It's actually quite simple. So hopefully today I'll make it a little bit simple. It really is all about partnership. And putting people's titles aside, putting people's organizational affiliations aside, and you put aside the fact that you've got some big names like whether it's Nestle or Starbucks or Microsoft or whoever, let's try to strip that away a little bit. And this really is about working with other people who have different job responsibilities, perhaps. They come from a different world, perhaps, the corporate world versus the NGO world, and so on and so forth. We're all people, and we all are coming together for, quite honestly, a common cause. And we all use different language, so we're collaborating. There's strategies at play. There's different management. There are different visions, different goals, values, et cetera, all these words that you see here. So I really want to hone in here to kind of put away the mess of what corporate social responsibility and creating shared value and the confusion to just hone in on partnership. So creating shared value. It boiled it down to the simplest, lowest common denominator. It really is about social benefit on one scale and business benefit on the other scale. And so we can place ourselves as nonprofit organizations on this slide, on the scale. So we clearly know what social benefit is. Social benefit is essentially our mission statements. For IYF, it's about our program outcomes for young people. So young people receive a better quality education. They're gaining the critical life skills that they need to be successful in life, and ultimately, and another, going to the next quadrant, helping them find quality self or salaried employment so people can earn a living. We also hope that they can adopt healthy behaviors, and our programs help them, like YouthActionNet, helping young people, young leaders, young CEOs push their agendas, their organizations, so that those organizations become more successful in their communities, getting more engaged in the community. So this part of the slide before, going back to it, the social benefit scale, we know quite well. We know what we do. The challenge becomes then the business benefit. How do we even begin to think about the business benefit, of our corporate partners? Where should we start? Well, at IYF, one of the ways that we start is we really take a look at our assets that we have as an organization. Again, this is where what I prefaced earlier in one of my previous slides, we need to remember that IYF is going on we're 23 years old, going on 25. So from our perspective, we have quite a lot of assets here. So I want to temper this particular slide to think of where you are. But look at the assets you have, leverage the networks that you have, identify the business players, and I'm going to start, this is the first warning sign, the red flag I'm going to put up here. I'm going to use a lot of business language here, and sometimes when I do that here at IYF, I get some nasty looks at people or some horrific, glances or glares that, oh, I'm going to the other side, to the dark side. That's the beauty of my background, is that I do have, this business perspective that I can lend into. So I'm going to use some business language here, and this is the first point, customers. So we need to look at our potential partners as customers or clients. And what do these customers or clients want from us? What are they demanding from us? What do they value from us? And then the idea here is, the goal of where we can begin is, how do we move them towards the bullseye of this diagram, moving them towards the center? And the center here for IYF is, how do they become a corporate partner, a corporate donor that has a very high value to it, so that they're investing in IYF and IYF's mission and our programs. And we want to move them from just being a friend on the outer ring of the scale. We want to move them into active prospects. And then we work with them, we cultivate them as active prospects, and we move them into perhaps a first touch of a program with IYF as a corporate partner. It's a small program, just a small intervention on a low scale, where they get a taste of what we can do and how they can become involved. And ultimately the idea here is that once they have that taste, once we hook them, if this is a fishing exercise, we actually get them into the center square, or the center bullseye here, where they become really very actively engaged with us. So that's really what we're trying to do here, is move people along this scale. And I know that all of you have very active networks, and you have your own, perhaps, boards of directors, and you have your own friends. I'm sure if you look at that pool of people, there are going to be at least 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them who are somehow engaged in the corporate world, and they become possible hooks for you and possible prospects. Or there are certainly influencers who can use you can tap their networks to get them to introduce you to other folks and move them onto this scale. So that's really what we're talking about here. So let's frame it that way as a goal. And then, so what do we do with that? All right, so here I'm going to go hot and heavy, full steam ahead, all feet in, head first into market language, business language. So what assets do you already have? So at IYF, this goes back to 2005 when we did our first strategic plan. I was asked to, our board of directors asked IYF, given where we were in 2005, we were a 15-year-old, we were an adolescent ourselves, and we were growing into adulthood, and the board said, okay, you guys need to figure out what you're going to do with your life. It's kind of like mom and dad saying, okay, what do you want to do when you go to school or college or whatever? What do you want to do with your life? So the board asked us essentially the same question. So when we did that strategic plan, we did a very traditional, I'm a very traditional kind of guy. That's the picture that you saw in the beginning, very reflective. It's in black and white. And we did a SWOT. And so we looked at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what this particular slide is talking about a little bit is twofold. Number one, it's the SWOT, it's the strength of IYF, but also perhaps weakness of IYF in terms of our product offering. So the upper left-hand quadrant, the product. The way to think about that is it's our programs. It's what we do day in and day out. It's the program framework. It's the program model. What is it that our staff around the world are delivering in impact and beneficiaries towards youth? So we think about our programs as products here. And then when we put together proposals for a donor, or if it's USAID or a company or whoever it is, that proposal actually includes some costing, so i.e. price. So you got the upper right-hand quadrant. And then we talk a little bit about, in our proposals, what is the communications plan? How are we going to promote the, every proposal I've seen, at least in my 13 years here. Is it 13 now? Yeah, it's going on 13. No, it's not, whatever it is. There's always a promotional aspect to it. How are we going to communicate? So there is promotion at play. And then place, of course, is where is the actual program intervention going to take place. These are all traditional marketing concepts called the 4 Ps. So anyone who's ever had Marketing 101, you've heard the 4 Ps. So every day, day in and day out, whether we like it or not, we have essentially been talking pure business language of traditional marketing. It's just that we haven't really called it that. We've called it, something else, business development perhaps. So again, IYF did a full SWOT, a very traditional strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats exercise. We looked at those assets, and we have to think about it in traditional marketing terms. Why do we need to do that? Because that's how our business partners actually think. Day in, day out, that's the language they speak. And again, this is traditional, this is very old-fashioned, and it has evolved. The thinking is, has moved on as everything does. And one of the ways it has evolved is that from the business point of view, customer orientation has become one of, not one of, the primary way, especially with social media and social marketing. So another way to think about product, price, promotion, and place is to flip it around from a customer perspective. For product, it really becomes about solutions. A business, a for-profit entity, is looking for solutions for their business models. They have a problem to solve, or they have a need to get better at, or to get more efficient or more effective. And our programs, actually, our products, can offer a solution to them that is of value, i.e. the next quadrant. So when we think about costing or pricing it out in terms of a proposal that we would submit, we need to think about what is the perceived value that the business would get from the solution that we're providing. And somehow we're going to need to quantify that. And that's hard to do. We'll get to that a little bit later. But we need to think about the price being the value. And then on the information side, this is really very, 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 I can't underscore how important this is. Because one of the things that I've seen in my role now, I'm switching my hats from the strategic planning part of strategic planning and outreach to the communications part of it, is quite often when I read proposals or I see PowerPoint presentations that we're making, they're very development speak. That's one of the language things I use when I edit stuff here, and I give my comments back to folks, is that this is too development-y. We need to strip it down. We need to think in bullet points, more succinct, and so forth. This is all about what information do we convey back to a potential business partner. And I think it is really paramount that we make sure that we kind of remind ourselves in the back of our heads that, again, we need to think about this from the business point of view. Be brief, be bright, be gone, bullet points, succinct, and make sure that the information that we are conveying is, again, conveying solutions to real business situations and problems and what businesses want, that it is of a distinct value to them, the value proposition, that we're adding value. And then it is accessible. So this takes me then to place. The traditional place is where the business transaction happens. And here what we're talking about is how do we provide easy access to an organization for what we're talking about. So let's take it then, let's bring it full circle. In the old way of thinking, the traditional model of doing business with a business partner is, let's just say I've got a project that's happening in a certain, in the backyard of Baltimore, in one of the neighborhoods of Baltimore. And I have this great program that's happening, and boy, I really need to take it to the next level. I have a specific event, for example, and I need to go out there and get some money from one of the local businesses. So it's a very fundraising kind of a concept. So the circle here says fundraising. So I go out there and I say, who are the possible businesses in my neighborhood who might give me some money to help make this happen? So what do I want to give? What do I want them to give money to? What's the pitch that I can make? And how can they get involved? What role are they going to play? And how much do I think they're going to give me? Those are the typical. That's the first line or first reaction that we've always had. It's a very traditional model. So what I'm asking us all to do here, what I've asked IYF to do, is let's put the hat on of our customers. Let's think like them, and let's talk about it in a way of, another way to look at it is, this is about a market. This is about a marketplace. This is a marketing opportunity. Who are the customers? So that first box doesn't really change. Who are the potentials out there? But let's say and ask ourselves, what business solutions do they seek? How can our activity, our program, our programmatic opportunity perhaps overlay with their business model, their business proposition, what they do, whether they're a widget maker or they're a service provider? what are the overlays? How can we overlap? What are the touch points? And then what information would be relevant to them? So this is very much a kind of theoretical concept exercise that these are questions that we're asking ourselves here. So this is our homework, if you will. And then we get into, well, how can we make sure that we can provide easy access to these potential customers to what we're asking them to do? And then what is the value to their business? So again, getting to the quantification of it. So these are questions that we need to ask ourselves before we ever approach a client or a customer. So let's take the IYF model. Again, please stop me if I'm going too fast or if you have questions. So when IYF asked ourselves those same questions, and this goes back to 2008 when we did this work, we realized that if you look at the programs that we have always been doing at IYF, we saw the touch points or the overlays, the solutions here that we can provide to companies lying in 4 main buckets. So there's no order to these, they're there. So let's start at the top. There's a human resources or a staff impact that we can have in the form of our programs can actually provide a business an opportunity to improve upon or increase staff satisfaction. That, in turn, helps them keep their employees, or it also can help them recruit employees. There are a lot of studies, Harvard Business Reviews, and if you go to any of the conferences on CSR, that talk a lot about how vital it is for companies to hire good staff and retain good staff. And if you look at the profile of employees today, and everyone talks about millennials and so forth, and how important that the millennial generation, I think most of you probably are millennials, if I'm not clearly, but it's very important as a value that companies do good work. They do good things. They have a social benefit in what they're doing. And so this becomes very, very important for companies. And I think this is probably going to be true for any partner that you're going to work with, a business, that the human resource aspect is very, very important. And we know how our programs can fit into that particular bucket, what role our programs can play there. Likewise, on the community engagement, moving down clockwise, on the community engagement side, this is really about the business being the good neighbor. What role does the business entity play in the community where it is located? So who are the critical stakeholders in the community? So here we get governments, we get community partners, we get community organizations, grassroots organizations, the public at large. Sometimes we could actually, for some of IYF programs, we include parents. Given that we work with young people, parents are part of this mix here. So who are the critical stakeholders that our programs can influence and give our business partners a share of voice, a seat at the table? This is really about how our programs at IYF are bringing our corporate partners in to give them a seat at the community table as a member and creating that dialogue. That's hugely important for a lot of companies, that they want to be part of the community. At the bottom here, at the very opposite human resources, we've got value chain integration. Value chain integration, this one sometimes it gets a little bit more difficult, but sometimes it actually is easiest, is how can we take what the business model of the company is, the widgets that they make or the services that they provide, and I'll carry it one step forward here is, if you think about widgets especially, how can we bring along all of the company's business partners, so the people that they do business with, their suppliers and their wholesalers and the people that they sell to, how can we bring that whole value chain into the mix here so that they can most effectively help the program move forward, increase efficiencies, that we can perhaps even spur some innovation here, so taking a widget and applying a new use for it that maybe the business never even thought of, but we did. We're very creative. YouthActionNet fellows are incredibly creative people. You can take a widget and you can find another purpose or another use as a tool into what your programs you're doing, and the business never thought of that. Businesses love that stuff because it's innovative. And it helps us perhaps achieve scale. So there's an industry impact here. The final fourth bucket is influencing brand perceptions and purchasing patterns of customers. So there's a sales, marketing, PR aspect here. Sometimes people look at this kind of negatively and we feel that, oh, that's kind of selling your soul. The way I look at it is, it's a reality. That's why businesses exist. There are stockholders and shareholders, and that's how the world works. And those things are there, and so the way I look at it is, let's leverage it. Let's make the best possible use that we can here, and let's try to influence it so that it is for the social benefit. Going back to that slide where we had the two axes of social benefit and business benefit, this is, again, the value add that we have, that we can offer as nonprofit mission-driven organizations, is that we can steer the sales, marketing, and PR aspects to support the social benefit. And that's good. So I think if we turn a positive spin to it, then I think influencing the brand perceptions and purchasing patterns can be a good thing. So with that said, this is how IYF thinks about, this is our model. And so when we take a look at our program, so when our business development department is putting together a new proposal and we're pitching something perhaps to a new business entity or corporate partner, we do try to think about it in these buckets. And how can the program framework and the program models that we're putting together fit into these particular buckets so that we can possibly write the proposal in a way that's slanted towards this kind of a language with these sort of outcomes and so on and so forth. If we do that, we stand a much greater chance at piquing someone's interest on the recipient, our audience side, to say, wow, these people have actually thought about this and they're using language that we use, and isn't that really cool? And it helps set us apart from, here's another term that I'm inserting, our competitors. All of us, regardless of what we do, as far as our missions are concerned, there is some other organization out there doing very similar things. And we do have this harsh reality that there are competitors out there. And that's a good thing, quite honestly, that there are a lot of people doing similar type of work, because the problems that we solve on a day in and day out basis are huge, and they're really important to society moving forward. But quite frankly, for the health of our own organizations, we need to be a little bit selfish here, that we want a piece of the pie. And so I think if we position ourselves here in this way, by using this kind of language, we're helping to set ourselves apart. And this will go into your strengths column of your own SWOTs when you do your own SWOT exercises. That, therefore, we need to stand apart. We need to stand out amongst the crowd. And so this will help us do that. So I want to play it out a little bit and give you some real examples from some real programs. But before I do that, I want to also give you some concrete ways in which IYF is working with companies and how we add value. So when we went through this exercise, we came up with a couple, some people like to call this, my colleagues like to call this a menu of options that we offer to our corporate partners. So, for example, all of our programs at IYF, we look at our business partners as co-creators, co-designers. So we bring them into the conversations about how do we want to structure the program, how do we want to build this program. So we do it together. They're part of the team at the table. So program design and management, we co-create them, we co-design them, but then to the box that's immediately to the right there, we also make sure that we use the language for both the social benefit and the business benefit, that these things go hand in hand. We also then, going the next tier down, knowledge and resources are leveraged across our partners. Well, what does that actually mean? Again, IYF is 23 years old. We've had how many 1,000 grants went out to over 400 organizations. A lot of knowledge was generated by that work, by those grants. A lot of resources were spent, but also a lot of resources were creating. We like to call this marketable assets. Again, another nasty word in the business world. But marketable assets are our products, our services, everything that we've learned, the data that we've collected over that period of time. And how do we package them? How do we use them? How do we leverage them across all of our partners? How do we utilize them and get the most out of them? How do we repurpose them into our proposals and into our programs moving forward? So that's what that bucket is about, really, is that we leverage our assets, what we have over our years, what we've done, and play it forward. The middle one's about technology and integrating it throughout programs. This is something that we can't avoid. Everyone, you guys know this probably better than I do, is that how do we make fullest use of technology? And this is social media, web, all that kind of stuff. How do we make sure that significant employee engagement opportunities are in every single program? this I can't emphasize enough. Every company that you're going to want to work with is going to want this, because this is about staff retention, recruitment, and making sure that people are satisfied within the business itself. Communications is another key piece that is in every program. How we leverage what the program is doing to move it forward, to make sure that it can continue to raise awareness and visibility. Not so much, it's not an automatic for business and PR and marketing reasons, quite frankly. It is about the social and the business benefit, going back to that creating shared value thing. Everyone wants to feel good about what we're investing in and what effort we're expending. And so this is where this particular box comes into play, is that we need to show how we're making progress against our goals and how we are changing society and how things are getting better. And everyone wants, it's kind of the old bandwagon approach. You know, when I was in high school, at least, we saw, you know, a group of people and they were doing really good, cool things, and it was, look at what that club was doing. Boy, I want to be part of that club. This is really about that. You know, we want to be part, we want to build people to get to join our club. So this is what this is about, is getting people to join on the bandwagon approach. And then the final one is about program evaluation and tracking and metrics. I can't underscore how important this is, because from a business perspective, again, putting on the business hat, the business folks are looking at this as an investment, because, you know, one of our board members is John Stasinski. John Stasinski's from Blackstone Management, one of the financial advisors and management groups. Blackstone, you know, owns NBC, Universal, and a whole host of other big organizations. And, you know, one of the things that he told us, I think it was a year or two ago now, is that, you know, during the in the post-2008 financial crisis, companies stopped spending. They actually were just sitting on their cash. You know, they were just putting it into banks. The sum of that amount of money, at least a year ago, if I'm not mistaken, and there are articles about this, was $11 trillion is sitting in cash in companies' bank accounts, not being spent. Well, what does that have to do with us? Well, that means, quite frankly, from an economic perspective, companies are a little nervous about the economic situation, so they're not really investing in capital infrastructure, because they're not sure how the return on those capital investments. So let's put it into real terms here. Why would I build a new factory to create new products or widgets if I don't know if there's going to be a market for all those new widgets that increase capacity? So that's why they're not making those decisions. Fortunately, now they are beginning to do that. But so all that cash is sitting there. So what do they do with it? So what we're seeing at IYF is that there's a bit of an uptick on companies investing in corporate social responsibility projects, because they do see that as a solid investment, because it is helping them to move forward for CSR programs like ours and yours, that they feel have a direct tie-in to their business proposition. It's helping them do business better. And if we can get this kind of merging of two thoughts, so the business benefit and the social benefit, if we can achieve that, if we can show businesses how what we do day in and day out with our mission is actually helping them to achieve their business goals, that's like nirvana. And so I think then we can tap better, perhaps. We stand a greater chance of tapping, this is very broad here, the $11 trillion. Let's think big, right? So program evaluation and impact tracking becomes really important, because we've got to show them a return on that investment. We can't avoid that. That's how they think. They've got to show that to their shareholders. And so we have to make sure that we are tracking what we do. What are the numbers? So when I ask here at IYF, I'm always asking, well, this is all fine and good, but what are you doing on the ground? What are your numbers? I'm always asking that question. It's huge, and we can't underestimate it. So let's get to some examples. So IYF works with Hilton worldwide. We have a partnership with Hilton that goes back now, going on to 2 years. And what I'm going to say in these examples is not exclusive, meaning that what we do with Hilton is not purely a human resource program, but this is a primary driver of the program that we have with Hilton. So what's really important for Hilton here is that, and we put out a publication, we released it in January at Davos, where Hilton commissioned a report on creating opportunities in hospitality. So the hospitality industry, of which Hilton is one of the leading companies within that industry, it is the primary driver of the workforce, so creating jobs around the world. The industry is the biggest employer of people in the economies around the world. Hilton is one of the leaders of that. And so Hilton estimates, I think, that they're going to be, I don't know how many, I can't remember now, but millions of jobs are going to be created over the course of many years in the future based on their expansion plans into certain geographies. So they're building all these new hotels in the MENA region, for example. In Saudi Arabia specifically is one of the countries, not exclusively, but one of the countries is where there's huge expansion going on. And so Hilton has a need to hire staff to fill the positions within all of these new hotels. And they're having a really hard time hiring people because they don't have qualified applicants. Hello, this is what IYF does. We have a life skills curricula that helps young people gain the critical skills on how to communicate better, how to handle conflict better, how to show up for work on time, all of these kinds of life skills. There are like now 75 lessons in this curricula that we have. And this is really helping young people to gain the skills that maybe they didn't get at home or they didn't get in the formal education systems. And that positions them as qualified to get some of these entry-level jobs. These are service industries, so dealing with customers. And so our curricula can be adapted to help young people get the skills that they need to be better at their jobs dealing with Hilton Hotel guests. There's a human resource impact here. So it's a workforce development thing that we are doing with Hilton in Saudi Arabia. This is hugely important for them because when they hire staff, they need them. They want to retain them because Hilton puts a lot of effort in. They have extensive, very deep training programs on how they get people Hiltonized, the Hilton sense of customer service. And that's a huge investment for them. And if you multiply it out over all of their hotel properties, not only in Saudi Arabia but across the region, it becomes one of the significant line items in their budgets. And they want to make sure that that investment's done wisely, and they don't want to have to repeat it. They don't want to waste that money. So keeping people on board, i.e. staff retention and recruitment here, is big. And we're helping them do that. And we're helping them do that in Saudi Arabia. And that's just one of the drivers. And there are other examples that we have of employee engagement and human resources. We've done it with Alcatel-Lucent. We're doing it with Starbucks. We're doing it with almost all of our programs actually have a human resource component. But Hilton is probably the most accentuated version of that. So let's move to the next bucket, value chain integration. Caterpillar. Actually, we work with the Caterpillar Foundation. It's not Caterpillar the business, and that's important here because the Caterpillar Foundation is a true foundation, but the logo here gets the point across that we're talking about Caterpillar, the heavy industry folks. So Caterpillar came to us with a program. Again, it's a workforce development program, much like what Hilton was doing. It's about jobs and getting young people the training they need to get into entry-level jobs. In this case, it's within the heavy industry equipment, and specifically how to use Caterpillar equipment, how to repair Caterpillar equipment, etc. And one of the things that was really important for Caterpillar is that they wanted to make sure that we included their supply chain. So folks that are helping, like they're wholesalers. So the wholesalers that are selling Caterpillar equipment in countries, or the mining companies that are using Caterpillar equipment. And what they want to do is Caterpillar is looking at this as a value-added proposition that they can offer to their customers, that they are creating a pool of qualified workers that know how to use their equipment, that know how to repair their equipment, and so forth. And that's a version of value chain integration. There's an industry impact here that is allowing then that whole sector to get involved in youth development, to get them engaged in youth development, so we're much more effective. We can reach scale in this way. We can actually come up with some program innovations here, so we can add new components, new lessons to our curricula. And, you know, Caterpillar loves this stuff that we're doing here, and we have a couple success stories that we can talk about. And this is a global program that's happening in 12 countries around the world, across most continents. So it's happening in China, it's happening in South Africa, it's happening, you know, in Europe, it's happening across the board. So this is a good example of that. Let's go over to sales, marketing, and PR. Our work with Samsung a few years back, this program has actually ended. And I'm using it as a reference simply because it was probably, again, like Hilton, was the most accentuated for its category. But Samsung really wanted, it was a workforce development program. It's what IYF does as part of our mission. So the programs aren't changing what we do here. So I'm not saying that you need to change your programs. What I'm saying is you need to look at the unique elements of your programs, the touch points that your programs have with what the business wants. So in the case of Samsung, our workforce development program, helping young people in sub-Saharan Africa, because that's where this program is taking place, I think it was in 4 or 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, they were entering these markets with, this was specific to their cell phones, Samsung cell phones. They were entering the market, they were a new entry, and they were wanting to tap into and eat away at Nokia's market share. So what they wanted to do is they said, okay, listen, the program that we're investing in is working with young people. Young people below are the consumers and buyers of cell phones. And so what they were hoping to do is that through this program, by helping young people get jobs in their respective homes and communities, that we were able to integrate Samsung phones and Samsung know-how and Samsung, the brand essence. So Samsung is all about technology and life and lifestyle and music and everything that we see now in Samsung ads about what their technologies can do. Samsung wanted to overlay that with our program so that we actually did a lot of creative things that were essay contests and business plan competitions and helping young people in Egypt, for example. These were young entrepreneurs who had ideas, but they didn't have perhaps all the tools and mentors and resources that they needed to start their venture. So our program helped these young entrepreneurs do that. So there was a business plan competition, and Samsung was behind it. Samsung funded that, and so Samsung became very involved, and we had all of these different competitions happening around the place, and that's a very value-added service to help set Samsung apart from Nokia in the marketplace. So that's how we were influencing the brand perception and hopefully influencing purchasing patterns. We were not, however, selling our souls to the corporate bad guys. We were still delivering a very solid workforce development, entrepreneurship development program with real metrics. I want to underscore that here. That's really important. We still are a mission-driven organization, and we don't lose sight of that. Finally, on the community engagement side of the house, one of the recent ones that we have here is Chevron. IYF works with Chevron in many different countries. Right now we're looking in different countries in Africa about community engagement and engaging critical stakeholders in the countries where they are operating and helping, again, these are all workforce development programs. How can we get young people who are otherwise employed and idle, giving them basic entry-level job skills so that they can hope to get jobs, not necessarily within Chevron's business, but within the community. And so helping to put a dent into the youth unemployment situation in the communities where Chevron operates. It's probably no secret that what Chevron does requires lots of permits, lots of government regulation, and so on and so forth, and the community engagement and community stakeholders and the neighborhoods that are impacted are vital to moving forward with a project in a sustainable way, in an environmentally friendly way. There are a lot of concerns that we all share with this kind of a business, and so there are a lot of community relations issues here. So what we're doing here is helping Chevron do that in a constructive, positive way. And one of the issues in all of the countries with Chevron, not all of the countries, but where we're operating with Chevron, youth unemployment is a serious piece of a challenge that a community is facing. And Chevron wants to get involved in that, and they want to be able to help on that front. It's not to say that they're saying no to the environmental side of the equation, because they're not. This is just our piece of this. And so we're helping Chevron tackle the community issues. And so, again, they are being a good neighbor in this case, and we can help them do that. So that's the part of Chevron. So those are the 4 buckets. Those are the 4 examples. And again, I just want to end this with a reminder that this is all about creating partnerships, true partnerships. It's not a we and a they, it's an us. So it's about collaboration. It's about creating a shared vision, establishing what the goals are, working together in teams. We sometimes, almost always, have to act as a consultant, helping them think through challenges. And thinking sometimes in business terms and marketing terms, and knowing that there is this issue of investment and finance and so on and so forth. So that's it. Sorry if I went too long or...
No, this is great. Thank you, Jim. That was a really helpful explanation and giving the examples as well from particular partnerships that IYF has developed. I think helps kind of shed some light on how the model actually works in practice. And I just want to remind everybody that if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the box in the lower right. And I'll be fielding those questions as they come in. But I already have a few, and I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about how to manage expectations when working with corporate partners and building that relationship, because answer to stakeholders. They might be focusing on kind of getting a quick impact or results that might not fit with the kinds of work that these organizations are doing. Mm-hmm. So how do you kind of manage that expectation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the ways to do it, again, every situation, every player is different. So I want to just put that little qualification in there up front that, everything is somewhat unique and there's no one-size-fits-all solution because personalities and players play a big role here. But I think one of the things that we need to remind ourselves is that there is a foundation, or there's a basis. There are some things that are concrete that we know won't change, there's a rooted reality. And I'll go back here in the PowerPoint, if I can get back there, just to point this out. It goes to this rigorous program evaluation and impact tracking combined with knowledge and resources leveraged across partners. If we take those two things together, what I always say is that we have experience. We know what works based on how many programs we've implemented and all the tracking that we've done in the monetary evaluation and the results. So I want to say the short answer here is that numbers don't lie. So we know what our capabilities are. We know what our programs can do. We know that our models of program interventions can achieve certain things. And I think kind of rooting the conversations, starting there, well, here's what we do. Here are some examples, is a way to root the conversation in reality. But then I also realize that the business partners are always going to push because that's their game. That's what they're made up of. That's their DNA. I remember that, at Electrolux where I worked, every goal that we had, I said I could do X, 100, and my bosses came back and said, okay, well, that's not good enough. You have to do 130. There was always this 30% increase in whatever they wanted me to do, which is just kind of frustrating and ridiculous. But these stretch goals always exist, so that's part of the mentality. So I do feel like you, A, need to root it in reality. Here's what we have done. Here's what history has proven. And then really trying to talk to them and involve yourself in the conversation and bring them along and try to find a middle ground of what you can achieve together. What is that comfortable stretch goal for yourselves? Because we always have to remind ourselves that we need to make progress. We need to move forward, and we need to stretch ourselves in our thinking and really coming up with what is our version of is it 130 or 120 or 110 kind of a goal. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's my take on it.
Sure. And going back to the slide that you showed, the kind of target, moving people through the rings to that center area. I'm wondering, how do you take the people that are even not in any of those rings yet? They're kind of floating out in the ether, and grab them, particularly for smaller organizations,
right? So,
and start to move them through to the center.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I actually played around with this figure a little bit because, as of right now, and the reality is that this particular diagram is one that is being used right now in the conversation that we're having here at IYF with our board of directors and how we're thinking about the future in terms of new revenue generation. So the piece of this diagram that I left out, and I wasn't sure whether to keep it in or not, is a square, almost a box, kind of the sandbox, and all of the space outside of this diagram is Jane and John Q. public, so the general public. This is where social media really helps. I feel that every initiative has to have some sort of, ideally, a robust social media communications plan that allows you to get onto the screen, onto the roadmap, out there in the Ethernet with what you do and what you're good at, and it needs to be very results-driven, and metrics, again, metrics help here, so that people, the John and Jane Q public, can begin to learn about you and know that, hey, I like that organization, I want to learn more. So simply by having them click onto your website is getting them into that outer band of friends and influencers, quite honestly. It might be over-exaggerate. I might over-exaggerate that point, but having them subscribe to a newsletter, for example, automatically makes them a friend because they're on your list. So the goal there on that outer ring is to get them on your list. Influencers are called out here in that outer ring because I see influencers as journalists who are sympathetic to your cause, who like you, who you have a relationship with, who can really are movers and shakers and convince other people. They can help sway the audience, things like that. And there are other, not just journalists, but there are other people who can do that too. You may have board members, for example. Board members are on this chart, quite frankly. In our case, we hope that they are all donors and partners of some sort, whether they're in the inner circle or the second to inner circle, but they're certainly on this chart. And I think you all should leverage your board members. And if you don't have a board member who's from the business community, get one. If you don't have a board member who is somehow tied into PR, marketing, or perhaps even media, get one. That's really important.
Great. And then kind of along those lines, I wonder if you have any recommendations or good practices when it comes to thinking about smaller nonprofits in terms of where do they start when they're reaching out? Do they start with the kind of regional or local office of a company? Do they go right to the top, somewhere in between? What are some thoughts along those lines?
Again, all of this is relative and needs to be put at the proper perspective. And so, yes, the answer is you need to place it within a scale that suits where you are as an organization in your evolution. So let's play this out a little bit. So if you're a grassroots organization operating in a very specific community, say a sub-district of, let's just take Baltimore since we're here, we're in one neighborhood of Baltimore. What I would do is, who are the businesses operating in that community in Baltimore? So what are the banks that have branches there, or what are the, I don't know, the restaurants that are there, the fast food chains? I'm not saying by any means that we have to restrict ourselves here to the big multinational everyday brands. I think if I did that, I would be remiss and I would be leading you all down the wrong path. I think we need to start with the reality of what is your situation on the ground, who are the players in your communities where you are working. Because all of this is rooted in what you do, what your products are, what you can deliver on, and you just need to identify those businesses and try to explore them as entrepreneurs. You know, do your homework, do some research. How do you see? This is a conversation you're having with either yourself or your team or maybe your significant others or so forth, but it's an internal conversation. How do we see what we do overlapping with or adding value to that business in my neighborhood? And if you can articulate that, and then you can go to them and use the terms that I'm talking about, the solutions that you're providing, the value that you're adding, the information that you need to convey, and the access that you can provide, then I think you can at least get your foot in the door and start to have a conversation. And ideally, you have then these influencers and friends who can help get you into those doors of that local business if you don't have that entree point yourself. So,
great. What are some of the challenges that IYF has faced in working with the corporate sector? Have there been kind of lines that you've had to draw in terms of your approach and how it might not fit with what they want, or any other kind of challenges that stick out?
Well, not surprisingly, one of the challenges is that one of the very first question that you all raised is expectations, and helping to come up with a, because I mentioned one of the value-added services that we provide is this co-creation, co-design of programs. Imagine a bunch of people, not a bunch, but we're bringing a couple people from the corporate side, from our corporate partner. They're coming into a conference room, and our program people are coming together, and our business development people are coming together. We're rolling up our sleeves, and we're getting down to business, and we're carving out, okay, how's this program going to work? What's it going to do? And all that kind of stuff. So as we're kind of having those serious conversations, we just need to work at it. It's give and take. It's finding the middle ground. Where is the middle ground? So if we're on one end of the scale saying, well, this is what we can do, this is what we can deliver because this is what we do day in and day out, and then the company's pushing us to achieve some other thing at the opposite, their own expectation, you need to find the middle ground. It becomes negotiating, quite frankly, and it's about talking and working with each other as equals, and everyone has a role to play, and it's give and take, and it's, okay, here's then our middle ground. We're going to land somewhere in the middle. So I'd say that's one of the challenges that we face. I would say the other challenge, I would honestly say, is companies. I'm amazed, quite honestly, at how I have to be diplomatic here. How people lose sight of the targets are being changed, the goals are being changed. There's a different thought, or there's a new CEO, or there's a new manager. So there's a lot of turnover in the corporate world, or there's a lot of thinking, rethinking. There's the reality of marketplaces, for example. Some of our corporate partners, I'll just give some examples. Some of our business partners won't allow us to put out news items because it happens to coincide with timing-wise of when they're going to release an earnings report on Wall Street. And say those earning reports aren't up to snuff and what they thought, and it's negative for them. And the shareholders, it's going, values go down and the CEO's thrown out and so forth. Not that that's ever happened with a partner, but there are embargo periods when we're not allowed to say anything. And I'm saying that as an example, a real example of being mindful of the business cycles. Businesses go up and down, things happen, markets go down, et cetera, sales aren't good, and we have to be able to somehow react in a way without throwing out the entire program and the model and the investment. We have to adjust. So I think being flexible is my point here, is that that's a challenge, is how can we agree upon a program in the beginning of a couple-year commitment, and then making sure that we can adjust along the way to unforeseen business realities that, whether we like it or not, are going to come in from left field, unanticipated. And that can be in the form of, we've got a new CEO or a new program manager or someone, a new contact on our contact if the business has changed. And I think we just have to be flexible. I don't have a good answer for that one, but it's just it is, okay, let's roll up our sleeves. Let's talk about this. What can we do? So.
Great. And I'd like you to, in closing, if you could perhaps share us a recommendation or two for all these organizations as they're kind of moving out and exploring the corporate partnership landscape. What are some pitfalls that nonprofits tend to fall into, or a couple of not to-dos as people are trying to kind of build their organization's partnership portfolio?
I think I've been in a couple meetings in my life not just at IYF, but also pre-IYF, where I have seen presentations being made, proposals being put forth in a meeting, PowerPoint presentations or whatever, for funding, proposals for funding. And I can sit there as an audience member and I cringe. I was like, oh, they didn't really just say that, you know. And one of the pitfalls that I see is we need to find the proper balance of the development speak with the business speak. So being succinct, using business-friendly terms, but still staying true to your mission, you know, it's somewhat of an art form. And I feel like what I would say as a piece of advice is, as you're putting together your plans and your proposals, if you have one of your friends and influencers, one of your board members, someone who's from the business side, share it with them before you deliver it. Have them go over it. Have them help you. Have them react to it. Have them kind of weigh in on it so that before you go into that meeting or that presentation, it has had the business eye to it. It has had that perspective added to it. That's huge because, you know, you only get these opportunities, the foot in the door, the meeting. They're sometimes really hard to get with busy executives, and you need to make the most of those very rare opportunities. You need to hit it, to use a baseball analogy, and I know most of you may not like baseball. You got to hit it out of the park. And I hate to waste those opportunities. And so this is really about making the most of those opportunities. So I think that to me is the most important piece of advice that I could give, is ask questions, get some help, seek advice. Okay?
Great. Thank you again to Jim for the presentation and all of this information, and to the audience for your interest and participation. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sharing a follow-up email that will include links to some useful resources, including these two publications, What Works in CSR Partnerships and The New Paradigm. And on behalf of the YouthActionNet team, we hope that you found this webinar interesting and informative, and please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions along the topic. The email address is there, yan@iyfnet.org, and we're happy to respond. And we also look forward to you joining us for future installments of the webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you.